All right. Well, I think we can get started. We got a good crowd. How y'all doing today? All right. You having fun at the Academy so far? All right. Well, thanks again for being here. This is a special treat. We get to use this space, Science in Action, weekly, every Thursday, in fact, at 12:30 right now. We get to interview a researcher affiliated with the Academy. A lot of people who come to the museum here, of course, interact with our exhibits, love to see the live animals, and we have scientists that are maintaining these exhibits and also the live animals. But we also have a group of scientists, researchers, who are based in the Academy, but do a lot of their work outside of the Bay Area. They'll go all over the world, in fact, and study life in its variety of environments, and also bring specimens back to study and analyze here, and also maintain a library of life here at the Academy. And we also have partner scientists like John here, who aren't working here at the Academy, but who are fellows and help us in our mission to explore, explain, and protect the natural world. And in fact, John has been president of the board, right? For how long? Several years?
Right. This will be my fourth year coming up.
Fourth year as president of the board of trustees at the Academy of Sciences, which is really great. And he's also a professor of biology and entomology at San Francisco State, so a good local scientist. Can we give John a big round of applause for being here? This is a real great treat. Thanks so much, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jeff. This will be a fun chat, I think.
Yeah, very cool. We are also filming these. We do get to film these programs and stream them live online. So if you find it fun and interesting to interact with Academy scientists and Academy researchers, and if you want to know the variety of projects that we do, you can, if you don't want to come back to the museum every Thursday, you can check us out online. You can go to ustream.com and check out the Cal Academy site. We will also be able to take your questions towards the end of the program, so if you come up with cool questions throughout, please keep them in mind and we'll be able to get to them. But John, can we start off first off with, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at San Francisco State in the Department of Biology?
Right. Well, I teach entomology courses, which is my passion, and do research on insects. I look at their ecology, their conservation biology, their evolution, which means I look at everything about insects. And it's my passion. It's something I've been doing for a long time. And it's the kind of thing that virtually every day you can find out something new. And really that's what science is about, discovery. And working with insects is a great place to find discoveries because there are a lot of insects out there. They're doing all kinds of fascinating things, mostly good things for us, actually, as fabric of the natural world and providing ecosystem services. But sometimes we have a different view of them. And part of my goal is to promote insects as being positive things in the natural world. And helping us in various ways. Although today we're going to talk about maybe a little bit of a darker side of things that we found in terms of honeybee parasites.
Yeah, but to start, could you share with us a little bit of the ecosystem services that you just mentioned? What do insects do for us?
Well, insects do a lot of things for us. They are involved in most of the energy transfer that takes place in ecosystems through animals. And the plants produce the things that we all need. But then those resources get passed on to animals. Eventually they become part of our food resources, etc. They provide pollination services for most of the plants out there that we use for food sources. And without insects pollinating plants, we'd all be eating grain. We'd be stuck with corn and wheat and things like that, things that are wind pollinated. If you like apples and almonds and all those kinds of things, think an insect, especially a bee, for that service. Another important thing they do that you may not have thought about is waste removal. I mean, we all put out our garbage, somebody comes and takes it away. Well, in the natural world, insects are really an important part of that waste removal. Think dung beetles, flies, things like that. Some of the things that we may not think of as important organisms are actually out there doing the recycling we need to get those nutrients back into the ecosystem and away from us. I mean, think of a world without dung removal. It would not necessarily be the same world we're in today.
Not very pleasant. No.
Not very pleasant, no.
Well, you mentioned that studying insects has been a lifetime passion of yours. Can you tell us how you first gained an interest in insects and where your interest has brought you in your career?
I was a kid growing up in Central Texas when I first got interested in insects, probably about the same age as some of you out in the audience. And I got for some reason became fascinated about butterflies in my backyard in this small town in Central Texas, and started capturing them with my hands, bringing them in, annoying my mother. And it was kind of a critical stage in my life, I think, because my mother could have done a couple of different things. She could have told me to get a life and get those things out of the house. Neither my mother or father had a college degree or knew anything about science or entomology, but she did something else that really changed my life. She bought me a book on insects. I couldn't read, but she read it to me. And so she says, I don't remember this, I used to amaze my brother's friends by reading this book to them that I couldn't read because I memorized it.
Wow, yeah.
And that sort of started it. Later, my dad barged into a faculty member's office at Texas A&M University and said, gee, I've got this kid who's interested in insects. His name was Horace Burke, the faculty member. He invited me to come over. My dad brought me over, showed me around. A few years later, I ended up working for him in the Insect Museum, then going out to West Texas as a 20-year-old kid, surveying insects in a part of the world that I'd never knew much about, growing up in Central Texas in those days. And that was another pivotal time in my life when I knew that professionally I wanted to become an entomologist at that point.
Right.
And there were some interesting things that happened. This butterfly here was one that I discovered on that early expedition. It was a new species. I took it to the expert on this particular group of butterflies, the skipper butterflies. And to my surprise, he ended up naming it after me. So I now have a butterfly, Pyruna haffernicki, named after me, that occurs in the Big Bend country of West Texas, Sonora, Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico, and perhaps is the most nondescript and obscure butterfly in North America. So I'm proud of having that that patronym, as we call it.
Yeah, very good. And so your career has led you to study a whole variety of insects in your time and at San Francisco State, including some insects that are resident here at the Academy. Since the Academy has opened with a living roof, you and a team of students at San Francisco State have been studying the insect communities found on the roof. Can you tell us a little bit about that research?
Sure. One of the things we wanted to find out is if you suddenly create an island of more or less natural habitat in the middle of an urban park like Golden Gate Park, what kinds of organisms will come and utilize that resource? And since I'm interested in insects, I thought this would be a neat opportunity to look at what kinds of insects would come and use those flowers and plants and habitats that are on top of this building. So a group of graduate students and undergraduate students and I set out to sample the creatures on the top of the living roof. We put out various traps, things we call pitfall traps that insects would fall into. We put out pen traps that confuse insects into think that they're flying into a flower and get caught in some soapy water. And we found an amazing variety, even in the first year that the roof was on this building, of insects that were there pollinating the flowers, using it. Something like 78 species of parasitic wasps. What do you think of when you think of a wasp? Yellow jacket, something like that, about this big, flies around, might sting you. These are things that are smaller than a fruit fly, that parasitize other insects, feeding on them inside those insects. So some of them can develop in a single aphid. If you know what an aphid is, these are things that are about that size. Think of a wasp that can develop inside a creature that size. What size must that wasp be? It's going to be smaller than the aphid, and so on. The natural world is just an amazing, with these links in the chain of things that are feeding on other things and utilizing resources in really complex ways, often with really unusual adaptations for the way they do that.
And interestingly, recently, your research has focused on honeybees. We're going to talk a little bit in a moment about a parasite that's affecting those honeybees. But first, can you tell us a little bit about the bees? We know that of course, they live in colonies. That's one of the most fascinating things about them. It makes them really successful at what they do. Can you tell us a little bit about how the colony is structured and just why they're so effective through that?
But before I do that, let me ask another question.
Sure.
How many different kinds of bees do you think there are in California? Different species of bees. 300? That sound about right? It's about 1,600 species of bees in California. Okay, so when we talk about the honeybee, that's what everybody usually thinks about as a bee. Maybe include bumblebees in there as well. but there are really 1,600 species of bees. Not all of them are social. Some of them live solitary lives. Most of them are involved in pollinating our native plants in one way or another.
Right.
Now, the honeybee is not native to California. It came in during the gold rush days when the colonies were brought around the Horn from the eastern U.S., where they were brought in the 1600s from Europe. So it's not a native species, but it's one that we really rely on for pollination of our agricultural crops
Right.
now. And they live in large colonies, hives, right? One reproductive individual in that hive, we call the queen bee, surrounded by a large number of females that don't reproduce, the worker bees. And then occasionally, there are male bees in there as well, whose one goal is to find an unmated queen bee and mate with her during her nuptial flight. So it's all a highly coordinated group. They have to reproduce as colonies, not as individuals. So how many of you have heard of swarming? So yeah, what happens when a honeybee colony swarms? They're searching for a home. That's right. They're not searching for you to sting you or cause your problems. They're searching for a home. And when you see a big swarm of bees, they're actually quite gentle in those kinds of situations because they don't have anything to defend. They're looking for a home. They're not defending a home. And they can find a crevice in a tree, start up in that area. And the swarm includes the queen bee from an old colony and about half the workers that go off and start a new home. Back in the original colony, the workers have created new queens. And at least one of those queens survives. She then goes out, mates with some drones, come back into the colony, and for the next 3 or 4 years, she's laying all the eggs in that colony, solely from the mating that she had on that one day's flight. So it's all a very complex kind of thing, and it's a society that's based on females. They're the ones that do the work. They're the ones that organize the activities of society. The males provide sperm cells.
Well, one of the interesting things about honeybees that has popped up in the news a lot lately, I'm sure many of us have heard about it, is something that's affecting the health of colonies, and that is colony collapse disorder.
Correct.
So can you tell us what is colony collapse disorder, and what are some of the theories out there about why it's happening?
Yeah, colony collapse disorder is a situation, a syndrome, where beekeepers go back to their colonies, maybe after being away for a month, and nobody's home, right? The bees have left. There may still be some brood in the colony, there may still be some stored honey, but the workers and the queen are gone. And they haven't left any dead bodies to speak of behind either. So, you know, it's hard to do the forensics of what happened to these. And it's been a great mystery. Started being noticed in about 2006, first in Pennsylvania and then across the United States. And there have been reports of similar-like things in other parts of the world as well. So it's been a big mystery. What's causing it? A lot of suspects. Bees get all kinds of diseases just like we do. So viral diseases have been a candidate for some of the causes. They get fungal diseases, sort of bee athlete's foot, if you think of it that way, and that's been another suspect. They also are very sensitive to pesticides. And one of the things that have been looked at recently are these things that are called neonicotinoid pesticides. They're pesticides related to nicotine that are used to control insects, and especially as systemic pesticides that are transmitted through the vascular system of a plant. Bees are real sensitive to these things, and it could alter their behavior so they get confused and leave. They also deal with a lot of parasites, especially mites. There's a mite called the Varroa destructor mite that's really bad, and it also is a vector of some of the viral diseases. So currently the idea is that colony collapse disorder is probably the result of these things interacting with each other in complex ways. It's not just one thing that causes them to collapse, if you will. It's dealing with a whole variety of challenges, and many of these things now are being passed around the world and moved from place to place. So the bees are constantly experiencing new things.
Right. And interestingly, what you and your team at San Francisco State recently made a discovery that, depending on what you continue to learn about it, may add one additional thing that could affect bees on a local, regional, or national or global scale. And that is really an accidental discovery, which is really interesting. We often don't think of scientists accidentally discovering things. Normally we think of them on this kind of slow and plodding methodological approach towards finding a solution to something. But can you tell us what your accidental discovery was?
Sure. And I mean, you're right. We usually think of scientists as mostly men, sitting in white suits, doing very careful observations in a laboratory, having everything carefully planned out. Well, science actually is quite different from that in many cases. And a lot of time, number one, it's not just done by men. It's done by women as well, and by people from all over the world. And serendipity often has an influence on that. Serendipity, the unexpected. And that's what happened with this case. I work in this building, this concrete building called Hensel Hall on the San Francisco State campus. And a few years ago, I had taken my students on a field trip. One of the things we did on that field trip was collect praying mantids. Really fascinating creatures. We brought them back to the laboratory so the students could observe their behavior. But what do praying mantids do? They're predators, right? So they have to have something to eat. My challenge to keep the students interested was to find something to feed the praying mantids. So walking into this building one October morning, I noticed that out in front of the building were all of these bees, honeybees, that were acting kind of strangely, walking around in circles, seeming disoriented. Didn't think too much about it. I only thought one thing, mantid food, right? So I went and got a vial, grabbed them, brought them down to the mantid. Mantid loves them. Mantids feed on things, on flowers and things like that all the time, so it was good food for them. But, you know, things get complicated some days, and one day I collected those bees, and instead of feeding the mantid, I went up to my office. And I sat down, I started answering my email, thinking about my lecture that was coming up, and I forgot them in a vial on my desk. Didn't think about them for a while until a week later I noticed the vial, and it was full of all these little brown pill-like structures. These are the pupae of a fly. It's the equivalent of the chrysalis of a butterfly. So I knew at that point that these bees were parasitized by a small fly. Small fly, again, smaller than a fruit fly, that was eating the insides out of them. And that started us on a quest to try and understand what was going on. And let's go back 1 minute.
Sure.
Jeff. And one of the keys to that quest was where they were coming from. Here's the beehive. Here's where I was finding them on that landing, and look right above, there's a fluorescent light. So those bees were actually abandoning their hive at night, when bees aren't supposed to be active, flying up to that fluorescent light, falling down below, and acting like zombies, walking around in disoriented behavior, etc. And in fact, we came to call this the flight of the living dead. If you've seen that classic movie, The Night of the Living Dead, well, this is the flight of the living dead. And in fact, it is a one-way flight. They're not coming back after this.
Yeah, so showing a lot of really odd behavior, and who wouldn't when parasitized by something like this? So you can see the tiny little fly kind of coming out of this bee here. Can you tell us what exactly is the fly doing to the bee, and then how long will the bee survive potentially before something grotesque like that happens?
Before they become a magnet producer, a maggot producer. Yeah, what's happening here is a female fly has found this honeybee, and she's using a structure we call an ovipositor, which is like a hypodermic needle that she's injecting between the segments of the bee. Now, these are real hard plates, but there's a membrane in between. She's found the soft spot, and she's putting her eggs in there. She'll fly off, and those eggs are going to hatch, and they're going to develop into little maggots. And they begin feeding inside the bee, and at some point, the bee's behavior changes. So rather than flying out at night, or flying out during the day and collecting pollen and nectar, as a good bee should, it has insomnia, I guess, ends up flying out during the nighttime and stranded away. We think it probably takes about a week from the time that the female lays her eggs for this behavior to show up. They fly out, die away from the hive, and then about a week after that, these maggots become active and emerging from the bee itself. At that point, they've eaten all the insides out of the bee. You can get up to 16 maggots out of a single honeybee. So these things can produce large quantities quickly, and it's not a pretty sight
Right.
to see this happening.
Right. Here in the lower photo, there's looks like 2 or 3
There's
maggots popping out right
there are
there.
2 coming out. There's probably a third back in there
Right.
coming out as well.
And with the film out now called Prometheus, reminds me a lot of the Alien trilogy,
Yeah.
with just like these parasites popping out of bodies.
You're
really gross.
You're not the first to make that connection. I
Right.
had a fair number of emails and blogs
Oh,
that made
interesting.
that same connection.
Okay,
Yeah, that
yeah.
it was like Alien.
Right.
Except this is the real world.
Right.
And
it's
then the other question becomes, can they infect humans?
right.
No. You're okay.
Yeah.
They
Thanks
ju-
for
they just
thanks
do
for the
bees.
slow response to that. Yeah. Build the suspense a little. So yeah, it is a real world, and so therefore fascinating research topic. So can you tell us how you and your students are going about researching this problem?
Sure. Well, we're doing several things. And one of the things we wanted to do with these honeybees when we first discovered them was to make sure that the honeybees were actually being parasitized outside the hive while they were foraging, rather than coming out and getting stranded under a light and getting parasitized, because it could be that they were just getting parasitized where we found them. So this is a shot of us putting an enclosure over the hive, catching everything that came out, and then we could demonstrate that indeed they were parasitized when they came out of the hive, not after they came out of the hive. But we could still be wrong about some things. It might be that the bees are flying out all out throughout the day, not just at night. We can find them at night because they come to lights, and so we recognize that as being unusual behavior. But if they fly out with all the other foragers during the day, we can easily miss that, and they may just not come back. So what we're trying to do to test that is to put little radio frequency ID chips on the backs of bees. There are 2 of them on this bee. They're the size of a piece of glitter. Imagine the nanotechnology that we have now that we can apply to these kinds of things. So what this does is give each bee a unique ID tag. We can recognize each bee. As it leaves the hive, it passes under a laser that puts out a radio signal that goes into our computer database and tells us bee 1932 is leaving at 12:02. And then when she comes back, it will pass under a laser again, indicate that bee 1902 is coming back at 1:12.
Right.
And so we can monitor their activities. What we do is that we parasitize one group of bees and mark them, and we mark others that we haven't parasitized and compare the changes in behavior
Yeah.
to try and get that out. That experiment is running now. We don't have the data yet,
Okay.
but it's going to have some exciting results. I think.
Right, and that's some really nice high-tech data collection that you're working on. But you're also asking for help from the whole community around us. Can you tell us about the citizen science project that's going on?
That's
with
right.
this?
We have a citizen science project that's going to start not next week, but the week after. And we're calling it Zombie Watch. After the kind of common name that this phenomenon has gotten in the media. And what we're going to be doing is asking people like you to be observant and to look around them and see if they notice bees stranded under lights. Might be a street light, might be your porch light, might be struggling out on the sidewalk someplace. And if you do, capture them, put them in a closed container, watch them for a week to 10 days, see if there are any maggots and pupae that come out of them. And you can then go to our site, register, and we're going to ask you to upload pictures of what you find, pictures of the bees to make sure that they're honeybees, pictures of the pupae, and we can actually identify these flies just from their pupae, even if we don't get adult flies out, and then adult flies. And what we hope to find out is whether this is a phenomenon that's mainly here, where we've been working on it mostly now. We found it in 80% of the hives in the Bay Area, parasitized by this creature, or whether it occurs all over North America. One thing I didn't tell you about the fly is that it's a native fly, so it's not non-native like the honeybee, and it normally parasitizes bumblebees and paper wasps. And it's found all over North America, from Alaska to New Mexico to Maine. In fact, it was first described as a species from Maine back in 1924. So potentially honeybees all over the country could be parasitized, and we're hoping that citizen scientists like you will help us get a quick answer to that question so we can tell whether this is a local phenomenon that's causing problems here or potentially a North America-wide phenomenon.
Right, and that'll be important to know because it'll inform how we might want to respond to the colony collapse disorder and potentially help the bees.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So look for zombiewatch.org.
Right. Well, I notice we have a question already coming up from our online crowd, and I do want to open it up to questions from all of you, too. So if you have a question in mind, please let us know. But Kathy, can you tell us what your question is? Right.
But one of our viewers says she sees zombie-like bees now and then that look confused, and she wanted to know if they were associated with colony collapse, and then kind of
Right. All right. I'll just repeat the question. So a viewer online who's watching this streaming noticed that she has seen some bees exhibiting some odd behavior and wants to know kind of, what specifically is the behavior and how she might be able to find out more.
Right. The behavior is for bees to show up in places you don't expect them, especially under lights. And if they're still alive, to be kind of going in circles or meandering kinds of patterns. Generally, they don't fly very well at this point. They may fly up a little bit and then land again. The way to tell if they're actually parasitized by this fly is to carefully capture those bees. It's nice to use tweezers or scoop them into a container. Don't pick them up with your hands. Even zombie bees can still sting, so you want to be careful with them. And then isolate them for a little while and see if maggots come out. If they do, let us know. And even before that, you can go onto this website when it's launched and record the fact that you found these bees in these unusual circumstances, because we're really interested not only in knowing if they're parasitized, but if bees are going out at night more than we thought they were, because it may be that this is only one reason why they might abandon their hive at night. It could be some of these other viral diseases and things that are associated with nighttime behavior as well. So we'd like to hear about nighttime behavior and also about whether they're parasitized. One other thing, our site will have instructions on how to build light traps. If you want to do the easy person's way of doing that, set out a light trap, see what comes to it. If you don't get bees, you'll get all kinds of other fascinating insects to look at.
Great.
Yes.
Do we have a plan?
Do we have a plan to prevent? Do we have a control for the fly? We don't at this point. It's a little bit more challenging than if this was a non-native fly that was parasitizing a native bee, for instance. Then we would probably look for a parasite of the parasite in its native land. But since this is a native fly and it's widespread and much more widespread than even the honeybee in terms of the habitats that it occurs in, it's a little bit more of a challenge. So what we want to do is find out more and more about the behavior of this fly. How does it recognize its host? What does it take to know that it's a bee that it wants to parasitize? What allows those eggs to hatch and to be successful inside a host? And maybe we can find the weak link in that chain that then we can exploit as a kind of way of controlling it.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, excellent question.
Any others? Yes, sir. Oh, interesting.
Oh,
So,
what-
yeah, you were feeding some of these dead bees that
Right.
had been parasitized to the praying mantids.
Right.
Could it then possibly affect them?
We don't think it can be transmitted that way. Although there's an interesting report in the literature about the fly, which we can't explain yet. And that's almost all of their accounts of the fly are having it parasitizing bumblebees and paper wasps and now honeybees that we've found. But there's one report of it parasitizing a black widow spider. How did it get into that black widow spider? Was it a parasitized bee that got caught by the spider and the flies came out and parasitized it? We don't know how to explain that one. So, sometimes predators might become hosts for these things as well.
I see we have a question from the far back.
Yeah. Right, good question. 1,600 species of bees. This parasite is only parasitizing a few of them. Several species of bumblebees, so it's getting some of those, but certainly not all of the other bees. Some of them are probably too small. Some of them are active at different times of the year, foraging in different ways. But this group of flies, there are 4,000 species of phorid flies found around the country. So many of them specialize on only one or a few hosts, and some of them are scavengers that just feed on rotting material. There's one other group of phorid flies that's had a lot of attention. It's been used as a biocontrol agent for introduced fire ants. And those phorid flies specialize only in fire ants, and they don't get other ants, and they don't get bees. So often these parasites have a very, very narrow host range that they specialize in. And we don't always know why it's that way, or even what exact characteristics they use for identifying their host. And that's one of the things we'd like to find out with these flies. Right. It would be if we can figure out what the cues are, and we can mess with those things a little bit. Maybe we can breed a resistant honeybee or something like that that puts off a different smell or a different behavior.
It looked like we had another question online.
Yeah, they were wondering if this is part of the colony collapse.
Right. So how do we know? Do we know yet if this is part of the colony collapse disorder?
Yeah, we're not saying that this is the cause of colony collapse disorder. What we're saying is that we have a parasite now that's associated with a behavior that's a symptom of colony collapse disorder.
All right.
And it's going to take a lot more research to know how important this is, whether it's a major player or a bit player in decline of bees. And one of the things that we think we may be able to do, though, even if it's not the cause of colony collapse disorder, is use it to understand how the behavior of bees is altered by being exposed to predators, parasites, pathogens, and use that as another way of looking into colony collapse, explaining what's going on, and trying to find a cure for it.
Great. Was there another question from the audience at all? All right. Yes, sir.
When you said it's connected to the alien, I mean, how come there's at least 16 maggots in there? Because that doesn't really make sense.
How is it that there are 16 maggots inside of one bee?
Yeah, because it must be very crowded there.
Is it pretty crowded inside of the bee, or what?
It is pretty crowded inside the bee, and we think that it's probably because a single female laid 16 eggs in a bee, that she was on that bee long enough that she could actually lay 16 eggs inside. When they start, those eggs are almost microscopic, and when they hatch out, they're extremely small, but when they finish, there's nothing inside that bee anymore. They've
Right.
eaten all of the insides out, especially the area up here, the thorax, where all the flight muscles are. That's where the meat of a bee is, and that's where they
Right.
finish up eating.
And so the really odd behavior and the bees kind of walking in circles, is their body already breaking down at that point? Is it already being eaten up?
At the time they're doing that, the maggots are still tiny.
Okay.
And you have to really look for them carefully. They're usually right along the top portion of the abdomen, and then later they push into the rest of the body.
Gotcha.
And by that time, the bee is long dead.
Yeah. Gotcha. Another question. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Does that ever happen where there's
Yeah.
two flies will lay eggs in one bee, or?
You know, we don't know. It probably would be good for a fly to know that, because if you're in there number two, the second female to lay eggs, then probably the other eggs are going to hatch first, and they're going to mature and eat that thing, and you're going to have wasted your eggs. They might even be cannibalistic and eat the larvae that come out.
Oh, wow.
So it's a great question. We don't know if the flies can tell whether a bee has been parasitized before or not. We know there are some insects that can tell whether a plant has had an egg laid on it by a member of the same species of insect, and avoids the plants that have eggs on it. But in this case, that's something we need to look at.
All right. Any final questions? Yes. Oh, yeah. Why are the bees attracted to the fluorescent lights?
Well, it's kind of the same reason that probably moths and other things are attracted to lights. And we think that it has to do with the way that insects and other animals navigate at night, and that they try and navigate using light sources as a compass point. If you do that with the moon, and you keep your body at a constant angle to the moon as you're flying, you'll fly in a straight line. If the moon is close to you, you'll end up spiraling in. If you watch insects coming into the lights, and these bees do it the same way, they kind of come in like that. So they're trying to navigate, we think, and they're doing it by using a light source that humans now have provided all around them, as street lights and porch lights and things like that, and they kind of get confused. So it's not really attraction, in the usual sense.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a lot we could talk about. I definitely encourage you all to hang out and talk more with John if you have more questions. But can we give him a big round of applause and a thank you for coming today? This has been really great.
Okay, thanks to all of you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And once again, if you are interested to see more of these videos, our videos of these chats are archived online. You can check them out on our video collections page on the Academy, calacademy.org. But thank you so much for coming today. Enjoy the rest of your day here at the Academy of Sciences. Bye-bye.
Right.